Sparks like totally dudical?
They're okay.
Okay? Tweaky, Sparks is your ultimate favorite group in the whole world.
For sure.
What's with you, Tweaky? Sparks at Magic Mountain's last all-night blow-off party of the summer. Radical rides, thousands of babes. What's your problem?
Brad hasn't invited me yet.
Are you kidding? Oh, what a joke.
Well, he's like a shy babe, you know.
Yeah, well, like, why don't you call him?
I'm sure that would, like, totally freak him out.
Well, what are you going to do if he doesn't call?
I'll, like, die. Hello? Oh, hi.
Is that the jerk?
Friday night? What'd you have in mind?
What'd you have in mind?
See Sparks at Magic Mountain?
Oh, wow, way to go.
Oh, wow, what time? Okay, bye.
Totally awesome.
Guten Tag, fellow Sparks and Volk. You're listening to All You Ever Think About Is Sparks, the only and therefore best podcast solely devoted to the musical history of that fun bunch of guys from outer space, Sparks. This is episode 44, wherein we'll finally start to take a look at Sparks' 1983 album, In Outer Space. Monte Mallin joins me once more for this one, and he'll likely be back again when we wrap up our discussion of the LP. Maybe you've heard it, maybe you love it, maybe you didn't even know it was a thing. Sparks surprised us with a new song on February 22, or at least it's partially a Sparks song. Don't Go Away was composed and performed by Max Richter, a German-born and British-raised classical pianist and composer. The song is being featured in the Netflix movie Spaceman, starring Adam Sandler, and is also found on that movie's official soundtrack. As they've done with several collabs in the past, Ron and Russell contribute original lyrics and vocals. As a musical piece, Don't Go Away does a pretty on-the-nose job of conveying the feeling of floating weightlessly, aimlessly in space, with its slow tempo, floating synth pads, and gently rolling arpeggios, the heavy reverb. Russell's voice is in full hypnotist mode here, chanting the song's title dozens of times over during what could be called the song's chorus. Ron's lyrics are as simple and direct as they come here, with a handful of short phrases breaking up Russell's seemingly endless incantation of "Don't go away, don't go away, don't go away," etc. If you leave, Russ croons elsewhere deep into the track, you will jeopardize hope for me, hope for you. Elsewhere, he reveals that, quote, you seem to know me better than I know me. At 7 minutes and 12 seconds long, Don't Go Away was never destined for radio rotation, and you'll never hear it in a dance club. But it's a lovely, dreamlike, impressionist-sounding piece, and Sparks merge with Max Richter's composition effortlessly. Also, Ron's wistful lyrics are seldom this simple and this direct, and they do a great job of capturing the loneliness and emptiness.
Don't go away, don't go away, don't go away, don't go away, don't go away. Please don't go, I'd be all alone. I need you, I need you. Please don't go, I'd be all alone.
If either the name Golden Bear Theater or Showcase Theater means anything to you at all, chances are you're either a theme park aficionado or a longtime resident of Los Angeles. Or you're a Sparks fan, in which case you might know it as the storied arena that staged hundreds of legendary musical acts over the years, Sparks very much included. You might also have heard that the Golden Bear will soon be no more. Six Flags revealed in late 2023 that the arena would be demolished, following decades of decreasing attendance and the lack of high recognition headliners. As of May 2024, the demolition is underway. Nobody yet knows what, if anything, will be built in its place. Sparks played the Showcase Theater, rechristened the Golden Bear Theater in 1993, at Magic Mountain in Valencia, California, at least 7 times between 1982 and 1987. But 1982 wasn't the first time Sparks graced the stage at the showcase at Magic Mountain. The 1977 disaster film Roller Coaster shows a Big Beat era Sparks playing an abbreviated set right there to a throng of movie extras. Throughout their scene in the film, cutaways from the band to the movie's titular attraction foreshadow the catastrophe to come. But Magic Mountain was anything but a harbinger of calamity and despair for Ron and Russell Mael in the real world. Sparks' shows at Magic Mountain embody the brief era in their history where Sparks had basically become de facto LA mascots. The Six Flags Sparks Mutual Admiration Society couldn't have happened without the enthusiastic buy-in from local radio station K-Rock, or KROQ, the self-proclaimed home to the rock of the 80s. Thanks to heavy promotion over K-Rock's airwaves, it was next to impossible not to know when the next Sparks performance at Magic Mountain would be. Sparks had become so familiar to Angelenos in the early to mid-80s that they began recording their own spots to promote upcoming shows at Magic Mountain, and K-Rock was more than happy to run them. Since the showcase was part of a family-oriented theme park, Sparks quickly noticed that they had a new group of fans, children under 18, or as they call them in the concert ticket business, minors. It made sense on the surface. The early 80s incarnation of Sparks was a cartoonier, breezier edition of the band than what had come before. They cut an odd figure within the more Disney-fied, family-oriented side of Hollywood, but they were welcomed there nonetheless. After all, they had a winning formula for youthier youth appeal. They were strange but clean-cut, opaque but oddly inviting. They came across to the young and uninitiated as just another funny cartoon duo whose shtick involved hyper-exaggeration and the comedic tension of opposites. Ron scowled and mostly stood sphinx-like behind his keyboard. Russell was a whirling dervish of sequined elbows and knees. Ron looked like a mustached Disney villain, and Russell looked like the plucky protagonist with a poofy coif. It seems odd now that a band whose lyrical concerns were and are of a distinctly adult nature would find such popularity with suburban families. But this was also the era where seemingly zero Americans understood what the lyrics of Frankie Goes to Hollywood's Relax was all about. And there is nothing cryptic about those lyrics. Most likely, this cohort of new fans wasn't paying much attention to Sparks' lyrics, but they did like that song about Mickey Mouse and the ones about hippos and Martians. I wonder how these oblivious attendees reacted to the decidedly more mature themes of songs like All You Ever Think About Is Sex. Were there 8-year-olds singing along, ignorant as to what the words meant, like really meant? Were there shocked parents clasping their palms over their kids' ears, hoping to avoid an awkward conversation? Magic Mountain opened to the public in May 1971. The brainchild of SeaWorld founder George Millet, Magic Mountain was developed specifically to compete with Disneyland and to offer Angelenos a cheaper, closer alternative to the mega-popular Disney park, which could be an hour or more away from many residents of LA County. They even had the right kind of branding to compete with Disneyland's friendly and familiar mascots. Warner Brothers gave Magic Mountain permission to use the likenesses of their Looney Tunes characters, maybe the only cartoon franchise that could compete with Disney in terms of popularity. Interestingly, the park owners decided to drop the Looney Tunes characters soon after, and they wouldn't return for years after Magic Mountain became a Six Flags attraction in 1979. In the place of the Looney Tunes characters were these hairy, bulbous mascots known as the Trolls, looking not unlike Grimace from the McDonald's commercials. There was also a big-nosed wizard called the Wizard. Magic Mountain's owners didn't really have a firm idea as to what, if any, theme their new theme park in terms of appealing to their target demographic. They didn't especially have a target demographic. But they decided early on that the park would host daily or nightly concerts, just as Disneyland had already been doing for years. Instead of playing it safe, though expensive, by booking long-established acts, Magic Mountain took chances on up-and-coming acts with hip and even edgy credentials. By the time the park was sold to Six Flags at the end of the decade, Magic Mountain had cemented a place in rock and roll history by giving many young Southern Californians their very first live concert experience. Its 3 venues, the Showcase Theater, the Gazebo, and the Kaleidoscope, were home to many great acts such as Fleetwood Mac, the Carpenters, Sonny and Cher, the Jackson 5, the Everly Brothers, and even Kiss, whose scheduled performances prompted hordes of long-haired metal and proto-punk fans to descend upon the family-friendly venue, swilling beer, sneaking in weed, and thrusting a dirty middle finger in the direction of Disneyland, who held to a much stricter dress code than Magic Mountain did. During the 80s, Magic Mountain provided a crucial stepping stone to stardom for a new generation of alternative rock acts, including fellow Angelinos Oingo Boingo and X, as well as Joan Jett, Bow Wow Wow, R.E.M., Poison, INXS, countless other groups who went on to become legends. Magic Mountain was consistently booking A-listers by the 90s, including new rock acts like The Offspring and Weezer, as well as established names like Tina Turner and Johnny Cash. A rare incident of violence during a 1993 show permanently changed the way Magic Mountain presented itself to the public, and it spurred a complete overhaul of their customer-facing policies. The then new and hot hip-hop acts TLC and Paperboy had been scheduled to perform separate shows on April 17. The all-hip-hop lineup attracted legions of young black fans, many of whom were Los Angeles natives. As it happened, April 17th was also the day that the jury in the Rodney King trial reached a verdict in regards to the criminal charges facing several LAPD officers. Although the verdict would not be announced publicly until the following day, Los Angeles was already bristling, teeming with tension and aggrievement. This was particularly true of LA's black population and their feelings toward the Los Angeles Police Department. On top of this heady, noxious bouquet of racial animus, Magic Mountain found that they had oversold tickets for the TLC/Paperboy shows, and the park was now at capacity. The park owners made the ill-advised decision to turn away all ticket holders who were not already in the park once capacity was reached. Feeling cheated and disrespected, ticket holders, both inside and outside the park, took out their frustrations on anything and anyone nearby. Down the road, several of the jilted ticket holders trashed a convenience store, a Wendy's, and a Marie Callender's, where many inside customers bolted from the premises, fearing for their safety. Inside the park, a full-blown riot soon took hold. The National Guard was eventually called in to quell the unrest. In the end, there were 60 injuries. Distraught over the bad press, the owners of Magic Mountain were relieved not to have to compensate anyone for injuries sustained, but the riot spooked everyone involved. And Magic Mountain Park began redefining and reorienting itself toward the more expressly family-focused, family-oriented destination it is today, much like Disneyland. They even rebranded Showcase Theater as Golden Bear Theater, in case the old name might carry bad associations. Today, that odd bird of a live music venue is no more. Magic Mountain's management did great things for LA's music scene throughout its 50-plus year existence. They decided early on that they would be champions of live music in general, and newer and left-of-field acts in particular. Some of the highlights of Sparks' live performances in the 80s took place at Magic Mountain, and for a short time, Sparks really were LA's favorite sons. Incidentally, there are a few promotional live discs floating around in Sparks' collector world that capture some of Sparks' magical Magic Mountain performances. They include 1983's Sparks on Tour EP on vinyl, BBC's Rock Hour number 423, also from 1983 and also on vinyl, and Left Coast Angst, which was released on CD only in 2014. Stay tuned, folks. Monte Mallin will be joining us in just a few seconds, and we are finally going to get into Sparks in Outer Space. Hey, Monty, how you doing?
How are you doing, Christian? I'm doing great. I feel like it's been months since we talked.
I think it has. It may have been months, but my God, they do go by like weeks these days.
They do indeed.
It's great to talk to you again. And we're about to finally delve into what I think is maybe the 12th LP by Sparks. I lose count. 1983's In Outer Space. But
so you don't want to do a 5th episode on angst?
I'm so tempted. But I think we were wearing out the patience of our most ardent listeners.
I thought it was great.
I thought it was great too. I enjoyed it too. I could talk about that all day long, all week long, all month long. But since we last talked, you've really, and I can't remember when you launched your Sparks themed YouTube show, but you did it in earnest sometime around then. And since then, it's really been banging. You've got a lot of episodes in. You've gotten to talk with a lot of really cool people. Has there been anything that has surprised you or excited you or sort of stuck out in your mind?
Oh, yeah. Well, I just recorded 2 more episodes today. Really fascinating conversations, including with our old friend Paul Barrett. So he will be on the show soon. There's so much I'm enjoying about it. I started about 3.5 months ago. We just recorded episodes 10 and 11. And what makes it so exciting is just hearing what people have to say and just letting people talk. And whether they're talking about, whether it's a fan talking about how, a guy, John Ashdown, who was in the UK, who went and got his hands on a Sparks album that wasn't released there, even in the 80s, which is almost impossible to do, but he found a way to get one of his favorite albums. We talked to somebody who was an artist whose career was completely moribund. And then after seeing Sparks, she said, if they can do it, I can do it. And it just turned her life around.
Wow. That's inspiring.
It is. It's very inspiring. And also inspiring are just the people who have analyzed it and come at it from an analytical perspective. And like we had somebody who's really broke down Ron Mail's compositional approach, for example. Okay. We've had people talk about the lyrics. So I feel like even after all this, we're just skimming the surface. And I know you'll give a good plug for it. Basically the show is going after 3 questions. One is, what is the cultural and historical significance of a band that's been going for 53 years? How do you explain this intense relationship that it has with the fans? And also, and things along those lines. I can't remember the third off the top of my head, but basically we're looking at these things and trying to get a sense of them. And the third is, of course, what give the show its title, which is the entertainment and art aspects, which are both so prevalent in all their music, and how that plays out. So it's been a great fun, and it's rolling along, and it's great.
That's great, man. Yeah. You've gotten some wonderful guests on your show so far. I noticed there was a guy from Trouser Press.
Yeah, Ira Robbins.
Ira Robbins.
Yeah,
right. And that guy, has at least a few things to say about Sparks. The world of Sparks.
He had things to say about everything, but we talked all about Sparks, and he wasn't, he had things that he liked more than other things, and so that was really fun to talk to him. And he's a real legend. Right. And I talked about that on the show. That was the one magazine I cared about when I was in my teens. That was the one. So that was
Nice.
great. Yeah.
That was great. I'm glad. All right, and I wish you and expect more success with that in the weeks and months and years to come.
Well, thanks. The only other thing I'll say is I have about 35 shows in my mind, so it's going to go for a while.
Oh,
But at some point, I'm going to say, what does all this mean, and start to put it down and start to create a narrative. I think I
nice.
am already, but yeah, I think there's a story to be told there.
Well, I love that, and I would also it would be great because your focus is on Sparks fandom. I can't help but think about Peony Shots, who did that wonderful documentary "Never Turn Your Back on Sparks."
Oh yeah,
And I kind of feel like you're picking up where he left off, and I think also he'd be a great person to interview for your show, and I'm sure he'd be willing and able.
he is. Peony, you are on my list.
All right, you heard it here first, Beanie.
I definitely want to talk to him.
All right, so here we are finally at 1983's Sparks in Outer Space.
Yes.
So what I'd like to do is kind of go about my usual business here when I do these things, give a little bit of background context as to what led to this record being made in Sparks world, and then, augment that with kind of what's going on in, broader pop culture, on the music scene, and then we'll just, get into the album and the songs and everything. But before I start that, I want to ask you, because you've been a Sparks fan for longer than me, and you were a Sparks fan already contemporaneously when this album was released. So, Monty, do you have a vivid memory of hearing this record for the first time?
Oh my God, yeah. The first thing you heard, of course, was "Cool Places"
Yeah.
with Jane Wiedlin,
Hmm.
and it seemed like you could tell right away there's something a little different about the approach compared to the last one. And we talked about that on the last episode, that Angst to My Pants, like its predecessor, probably needed a little bit more work on the production side, right?
Yeah.
But when this one, you could tell there was a tighter sound to it. It was a tighter feel to it. But when you just heard it for the first couple times, you didn't really know why. And then when you heard the whole album, then you start to get a sense of the general approach that they were taking. And then you learn that this was done, they produced it, and they had their own vision
Right.
for this album. And all the pieces start to come together. And I just remember when I heard it the first time, I enjoyed it. I didn't go crazy about it the way I did the last two albums, in particular Angst at that time, but I enjoyed it and I thought it was a good album. And in preparing for this show, I've listened to it a few times and I think it holds up.
Mhm.
Uh, but I enjoyed it then and I enjoy it now. It's never gonna, it didn't then and it's not gonna now become one of my top 10 Sparks
Mhm.
albums. But that said, it's not a bad album. It's a solid Sparks album, and I know we're going to talk about this a little bit more. It's
Yeah.
very interesting how they approached it production wise, and what that means. And we can talk about this later, but what that means for for what they did later in their career. I think it had
Yeah.
now. That's something I couldn't see at all in 1983,
Right.
but now I can look back and say, yeah, this is actually a pretty important album.
Right. And I get what you're saying here. The album um, does represent it's transitional in my view. It's definitely a not even that subtle of a break from where they were just before the two albums that preceded this, where they had enlisted the Bates Motel / Gleaming Spires guys and kept them on board for this, although they're hardly audible, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But this is the first album that they made that they self-produced,
Right.
um, perhaps with I don't know how much help from Dan Laxman or the other folks from Telex over in Brussels, Belgium. Um, but it was, I think, maybe probably the first inkling they got that, hey, we can do this thing on our own and we can chart our own path.
Yeah, well, I think that's exactly right. And They after this they only did one or maybe just one or two albums that somebody else produced. I mean, I know Pulling Rabbits had a different producer, but
Yeah.
I think my take on it is that they did this, and then with Pulling Rabbits it kind of wasn't what they wanted, and they said, let's just do this ourselves. Let's just do
Mm.
this ourselves. So, you see ups and downs and you see it evolving as they did it,
Yeah.
but you really hear that it's like they almost were saying to themselves, and I don't know this, but it seems like they were almost saying to themselves what you and I were saying about the last two albums. It needs a little bit more work. It's not polished. It has those two albums had a big sound,
Yeah.
but I think they wanted something that was a little bit different.
Yeah.
Ron is so careful with his arrangements, and that's such a priority for him. And I think he wanted to bring that element back into it, and you hear all that in big time. In big time, you hear that. You hear a little bit more variety in the music on this one. You hear
Right.
a couple songs that maybe don't quite hold up, but overall,
Yeah.
you can hear them asserting their own influence the way you would expect them to now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to give away too many spoilers about my ultimate thoughts about the album, but this was an album that I generally kind of overlook in some instances, mainly because I love the preceding two albums so much, that I wasn't really sure if maybe there was a buried masterpiece in there that I hadn't just taken the time to uncover. And well, I'll just say I'm somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Um, but so I want to back up just for a second and get into what were the circumstances that brought them to record this album. So late 1982, they were still doing some gigs in support of Angst in My Pants. There was some talk of a lot of interest in Japan for the guys to do a tour over there. It didn't materialize. So they went with their original plan, which was just to keep gigging throughout. I can't recall, but I think it was just kind of the West Coast area in late 1982, and then they still had a deal with Atlantic Records to make two more albums after the two that they had just done. Uh, and they had decided to go to Sin Sound Studios in Brussels, Belgium, to record this one. And this is interesting to me in a lot of ways. Sin Sound Studios, this is Telex's studios. Telex, the Belgian technopop band. A couple of weeks ago, I had a long conversation with John Ashdown about the Telex album Sex from 1981 that had Sparks, presumably, Ron's lyrics on every song on that particular album. And we know that Ron, in particular, struck up a big, a really important friendship with the members of that band, in particular, oh, not Michelle Moores, I can't remember, Mark Moulin. But for whatever reason, they decided they were going to record their next album over there to Brussels. So they went over there to record in Dan Laxman's Sin Sound Studios. And also, they, I guess, had paid to send their current backing band, the Gleaming Spires guys, over there to record with them, which is interesting to me in a few ways because they're not really that audible on the album.
Mm-hmm.
And so many other times up to that point in Sparks's past, when they had decided to, leave to another country or continent and record somewhere, they didn't bother with even keeping their previous backup band, let alone, flying them all the way out there. Yet they did that this time.
Well, you've said a lot of interesting things there, and I'm looking at the album while you're talking. It was engineered by Dan Laxman, except for two songs. It was
Yep.
album coordination was Mark Moulin.
Okay.
So there definitely was some work
Whatever
with
that
those
means.
guys. It was definitely some coordination on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think at this point, yeah, now who else was in that band? Because it says thanks to a number of people, and it mentions Keith Forsey, of course, but
Oh,
it also mentions Mark Molan, Dan
hmm,
Laxman, and of course Jane Wiedlin, who obviously they thanked. Uh,
right.
so yeah, no, they were in that community, I think.
Yeah. And
But one other thing that you said about the band is so interesting because I think I if I were to the way I would see that is that one, they were still interested in touring with those guys
yeah,
because their live shows they did play shows outside of the LA area in 1982 and 82 and 83, and their live shows were phenomenal. I mean, they were just so much fun. It was such a
right.
fun band, and I think they were interested in touring with those guys and remaining some kind of cohesive band unit. So maybe they hadn't found the right balance in terms of what they want to do, in
Yeah,
terms of being a band and in terms of being Ron and Russell Mael.
it makes sense. I mean, yeah, they knew they had a fantastic live band there. Maybe they weren't sure quite what they wanted to do with them in the studio, but they
Yeah.
wanted to keep them on their payroll, which makes sense.
Yeah. Well,
And
David Kendrick, in the interview that I did with him, he said that by this point they were already playing a minimal role on the album, which is what you were saying.
right, right. Um, going through my notes here. Yeah, so yeah, one of my questions was, was there much of an input for the telex guys at all? And I asked that question because especially after uh, talking with John about the telex album Sex, the um, the aesthetics of that album are so much more like in outer space than they are like the two Sparks albums that preceded. There's very little guitar. There's very little, there's very little rock. There's not a lot of swing. It's kind of regimented in, almost to the point where you can kind of imagine, what we sort of take for granted today, where you can see the waveform, uh, patterns, stacked on top of each other, like on a monitor or something. I don't want to say less dynamic, but it is less rock oriented, and it is more sort of planned and programmed,
Yeah.
which is
And
Telex's thing.
I think it was more in a stricter new wave style too, like a song like Cool Places. I mean, that's just pretty much straightforward of a new wave song. It has Sparks elements. It's Ron and
Sure.
Russell. But I think you hear a little bit more of that on this album than I think the prior two were just crazy Sparks rock albums in their own
Yeah.
world. This one's trying to fit in a little bit more into the prevailing musical themes at the time, and that's my impression.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
it could
know.
be.
Yeah,
And I think it depends on how you want to, define new wave, because I find Womp and Angst to be really new wave.
hmm.
Um but then you've also got, new wave to synth pop, where I guess you could see some sort of a line from here or there, and maybe those records were somewhere closer to the rock end of new wave, and this one is closer to the more synthy, space of new wave.
Well, by all means, new wave was pretty broad. It covered a
Yeah,
lot of material. So yeah,
right. I mean,
I
how do you
take your
define
point.
it?
Yeah, that's a fair
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, but they utilized in this album a lot of similar things sonically that Telex did with that album Sex, and a lot of the stuff they were doing around that time. And frankly, a lot of used a lot of the elements that were really in vogue by 1983 by a whole bunch of musical acts that were directly inspired by Sparks. And that's another thing that's interesting to me about this record, is because in many ways it is Sparks coming face to face with sort of what they have wrought. There were so many acts around this time that were inspired probably most directly by Number One in Heaven. and they started to embody that synth pop kind of sound and presentation. And in some ways, even did the whole, we've got two guys. One guy does the
Oh yeah,
songwriting and
for
and
sure.
the keyboard work, and the other guy does the singing, and he's more hyperactive. And by 1983, that was all over the place. You had OMD, and you had the Human League, and Heaven 17,
Pet Shop
and
Boys
Yazoo,
and
and Pet Shop
Soft
Boys were
Cell. Yeah,
right.
no, that was
Depeche
definitely.
Mode, more or less, and so I'm sure that couldn't have escaped their awareness that all of these these up and coming bands who now had just hit the mainstream had in many cases openly said that Sparks was one of their biggest inspirations. And here they are trying to either catch up or ante up or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if any of those bands deny it though. I mean, they probably
Hmm.
deny it. They probably won't. Will they probably don't act like they were that influenced by Ron and Russell in some cases. In some cases, they'll be more open about it. But I don't think any of them can deny that Ron and Russell had an influence, especially that album, especially Number One in
Hmm.
Heaven.
Hmm.
That was huge, and that
That's the
that
big one.
influenced.
So Russell described the record as less guitars, more synthesizers. It's a much lighter album than Angst, more danceable, more electronic. There it is. So this was something that they definitely had in mind when they were making it.
I think that's a good description. I mean, there's more
Yeah.
to say, but I think that is the difference. I mean, you weren't dancing with angst; you were being hit over the head with it. And we talked
Yeah.
particularly about side two, how there were a couple times when they actually pulled back a little bit, but then they come and hit you real hard at the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and you made the point that the whole first side and the first two songs, that's 7 songs in a row of just hammering at you, and just it's almost overwhelming. But this one
Right.
is a little more subtle. It has a little bit more musical nuance, and it was clear that this is Ron and Russell kind of deciding being very careful about how they wanted this to sound.
Yeah.
And the other one, don't forget, the other one, Angst, was produced by Mac, who was
Yeah.
basically, in a Giorgio Moroder. So they had 2 albums where they had, I'm sure, some input and control, but overall, they didn't have as much control as they might have liked over the production and how it sounded, because Giorgio Moroder and his team were kind of calling the shots. This
Right.
is still a Giorgio Moroder Enterprises, but they clearly, I guess Giorgio Moroder just didn't want anything to do with them by this point. So just do whatever you want.
By the way, turns out that two songs on this album were actually recorded in Giorgio Moroder's Beverly Hills living room studio.
Is that right?
Yeah, and one of them was "Cool Places."
Uh huh.
The two Jane Wiedlin songs
Oh,
were
lucky me,
both
lucky you.
recorded. Yeah,
Yeah.
they were both recorded in Beverly Hills in Giorgio Moroder's living room studio right there. Those the only two. But I do really think that they, for whatever reason, wanted to kind of go back to that sort of well of inspiration that they got from Number One in Heaven to do the song. I mean, this album. I wanted to,
Wait, 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 wait.
yeah,
So you see parallels between Number
mm,
One in Heaven and this album
I do.
because they're both electronic, or beyond that?
I don't think it's an accident that they were publicly saying that this was going to be a more electronic album, um, and that they were looking to Giorgio, their work with Giorgio as an inspiration. And I think probably the best example of that is "All You Ever Think About Is Sex," which and I want to get into that in more detail, and we will a bit later. But that song is really interesting to me in a lot of ways. First of all, that it is a from this it's a high energy song, the high NRG, that sort of subgenre of music that pop early to mid 80s, and the origins of that subgenre were directly linked to Giorgio's Italo disco and Donna Summer, the Donna Summer track, I Feel Love. There's a lot in that particular track that harkens back to the work they did with Giorgio and what Giorgio had been doing.
Well, I hadn't really thought about that, but I don't see me personally, I don't quite see the connectivity with Number One in Heaven. However, you could almost say that this is, a lot of people aren't going to like me for saying this, but you could almost say that this is Terminal Jive done right. It's borrowing on some of the tools and things that they learned, and some of the skills that they learned working with Giorgio, but instead of ceding all the control over to Faltermeyer and having all their songs rejected, they said, here's what a dance album that we would make would sound like if we were the ones who really, maybe these were all outtakes from those 21 songs. Who knows? But I mean, I'm joking, but maybe I can see that. I don't see the connectivity so much with Number One in Heaven, but I can see the other. I can see it a little bit closer.
I mean, if you want to take it from a totally superficial perspective,
that's where I live, baby.
Well, and that's where we're going to live for the next 2 hours or hour or whatever. Who knows? They wanted to downplay the rock elements. They wanted to get rid of guitars, which is very famously what they said out loud when Number One in Heaven was about to come out. So that the reliance on synthesizers, fewer rock instrumentations, fewer rock just aesthetics, I suppose, and also maybe the way you build songs. I think a lot of these things kind of point to where they were a few years ago. I don't think it sounds exactly the same, and and I'm happy to make that point.
Of course, yeah.
And and a lot of that has to do with, well, I mean, first of all, there's Keith Forsey, who who knows? I mean, like Number One in Heaven, I don't know what that would have sounded like without Keith Forsey, but there was so much gusto and blood and verve and all of his drumming there that made it come to life. This is not that. This album doesn't have the same ambitions as that one did. This is not going to get everyone on the dance floor, and it may not shake your soul in the way that one did. But I think there are some parts of the aesthetics, and I think there are some parts of the approach that are kind of similar to that. It's a paring down in a lot of ways. And this is also one of the reasons why I think it's surprising that that Ron and Russ even bothered to send the Gleaming Spires Bates Motel guys all the way to to Brussels to record this, because you can barely hear them. In much the same way that in Number One in Heaven, like what could you really hear other than the synth and Russ and Keith Forsey?
Well, again, I think with the Gleaming Spires guys, I think in their minds they were still a band, and they were touring for another 3-4 years, I think, at least 2 or 3. But I want to push back a little bit. I hear what you're saying, but I still think that there's more in common with Terminal Jive in terms of shorter songs.
Yeah.
The subject matter isn't like this, heavy stuff about life and death, and
that's true.
Number One song in Heaven. It's more about praying for a party.
Yep.
And I think they were starting to go. I really think that they were taking everything that you just said, but thinking about, well, if we were going to do Terminal Jive the way we wanted to take those elements and put them into the kind of music we really wanted to do, I think this is where it would come out a little bit. There's other places it could have come out. I'm not saying that it's determined. I'm just saying this was a good use of all the things that they learned in those processes. And there's no question they learned a lot about how to produce and how to make electronic music. But yeah, I hear it. I just hear it more in common with the second album than the first of the.
Okay. No, there's
Yeah.
okay. There's a lot to chew on there.
Yeah.
Um, I, that actually makes a lot of sense. I could totally see this as sort of a terminal jive, done right, type of thing. And it, but and at this point, they're coming from the position of more control, more power. They've gotten some airplay, and they feel like they can, maybe call the shots a little bit more.
Yeah, I remember there were times when Ron has hinted that with Terminal Jive, upon further listening, they heard that there was, if it had been produced a little bit differently, if it had been made a little bit differently, it could have been a better album.
So
I
that's the
don't,
irony for me about
yeah,
that one. I don't want to go too far down this route, but I mean that
of course,
because I think that album, and we may have said this, I may have said this before to you. I think that album sounds fantastic.
no
Uh,
question.
I
Yeah,
think it's the songwriting that doesn't make it for me on that one. And I think that's because it was rushed and the things that Ron wanted ended up being scrapped and didn't,
yeah,
wind up in there. This record is a different case because I think this was a very this is more intentional,
yeah.
I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I don't want to repeat myself either from what we talked about before, but I really do think, and as I recall, it seemed this way even then, that they, after Terminal Jive, and even after Number One in Heaven, and then introducing before that, and Big Beat, I mean, these were such all over the place, 4 albums, so totally
Yeah.
all over the place. I think they just felt they needed to make a fresh start, and
Okay.
the Bates Motel guys gave them the chance to do that. And that for
Yeah.
2 albums, they just had a lot of fun
Yeah.
making music that was rocking out. And now they're starting to say, okay, where are we going with this? Even if it was subconscious, I think
Yeah.
they're starting to think about those things a little bit.
Gotcha. 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 Okay. Let's see here. As I mentioned, 2 of the songs from that album were not recorded in Belgium. Yeah, that was Cool Places and Lucky Me, Lucky You. Those were the 2 songs that had Jane Wiedlin of the Go-Go's. The story about how Jane Wiedlin got involved, I don't know how much you know about that, but I guess there's a little bit of conjecture depending on who you're listening to. The Jane Wiedlin connection happened after Ron and Russ returned back to LA from Brussels, I guess is what I wrote down. Their fan club received a letter from Jane, who, of course, was the rhythm guitarist and backup vocalist, sometimes lead vocalist of the Go-Go's. And depending on who you ask, the content of the letter from Jane was Jane had either had said that she was in her younger years the manager, the president of a Sparks fan club in the LA Valley area, but she wrote in to say that she wanted to meet Ron and Russell, and also, by the way, she wanted to marry Russell. And
That sounds plausible to me. I hadn't heard that. I
yeah,
hadn't heard that, but I had heard that she was president of a Sparks fan club. So
yeah.
she was already a little bit familiar with them, and I think because they both had stature in LA, they were able to do that, to follow up and to make something like that happen.
Yeah, so not exactly sure, where the providence of that first communication came from, but they did get together very early in 1983. Ron and Russ met up with Jane, and then they had a whole list of songs that they had planned that they wanted to record for the album, and they decided on 2 that she would record with them, and they did that in LA in Giorgio's Beverly Hills Studios. And of course, one happened to be Cool Places, and the other one was Lucky Me, Lucky You.
Do you think Cool Places was designed to be a hit? I mean, it was like,
Yes, absolutely.
yeah,
It was absolutely designed to be a hit. In fact, I was reading about what Russ was saying about the writing and recording of that song. What they really wanted to do at first, at least between Russ, maybe Ron, and Jane, was to name check all these places in LA that were hot spots that people could listen to and kind of glom onto. If you're listening, on K Rock or whatever. Eventually, they decided against name checking a bunch of these places because they thought it just sounded a little bit too cheesy. But certainly, it was designed to be a hit, at least a local or regional hit.
Well, you've brought up something really interesting there. Since we haven't gone through the songs yet, I'm going to follow through on this for a second to get your thoughts. So they were pretty much at the height of their popularity in LA,
Yeah,
and yet they still had national aspirations,
right.
And
Sure.
they really were focused on the U.S. They weren't, I mean, the rest of the world was whatever, but they were really focused on the U.S. and having a hit in the U.S.
Right.
And this one, I think it made the top 50 or something like that. I mean, it did
49. Yeah.
49. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it did chart, but do you think, based on what you're saying, do you think that they were focused on L.A. more than the rest of the U.S. or rest of the United States, or do you think they're starting to think a little bit more broadly?
That's a great question. I think that maybe their initial impulse was to hew towards LA, and very quickly they realized that that was not going to get them where they wanted to go, which is probably why they decided against including all of the LA specific references that they wanted.
Right. It seems like
and-
after that, despite the Dick Clark American Bandstand appearances, they were kind of like okay with being an LA band for a few years,
Yeah.
while they were still, again, they was getting, the 80s were wearing down, and they weren't breaking on the broader US stage, but they're still touring there.
Especially in LA, and especially because of K Rock. I mean, they were, they got airplay all the time, at least, regionally. So it made sense for them to try to lean into that and hope, that might blow up. Plus, what's also close to LA, what's in LA, and that's Hollywood.
Right.
And they, of course, would take a lot of advantage of that, in that time, and a couple of years after that as well.
Well, this was the third album in a row that, really broke well for them in LA. So they were establishing themselves in some ways as an LA band. And, that's one thing on my show I really want to get into. I want to get a couple guests from that period on to talk about that a little bit, because it seems like they were pretty much settled into playing Magic Mountain and, being an LA focused band. And, it seems like they were in a good life for a few years.
Right. Makes it all the more interesting that they flew all the way to Brussels to record this album.
Wonder what, well, that might be going back to what you were saying about the telex connection, because obviously
Right.
there's plenty of places they could have recorded it, but
Right.
they wanted to be with those guys.
Yeah, and and again, and those guys, what they were doing was much more in line with what In Outer Space sounds like versus what the two previous albums that Sparks made sounded like.
I think you're making some great connections there.
I love making connections.
Yeah,
Who knows if they mean anything?
Because I mean, they didn't have to go to Brussels.
Right. Yeah. And they did, and they did that, and they sent the whole band out there, I guess. And and if you look at the inner sleeve of that LP, there's a big photo of Ron and Russ, and they're right outside the. There it is, that thing right there. You've got it, Monty.
That thing right
and
there.
That is called. I'm trying to go through my notes because I know that's a thing in Brussels, and it was built for the 1958 World Expo to show off Belgian engineering, and it's meant to show a blow up of some kind of an iron crystal. Anyway, it must have meant something to them, to have them, show that so prominently.
Yeah, Yeah,
I'm
no,
thinking.
it's a great
Yeah.
sight. It's a great picture. Um, yeah, so there you go.
Yeah.
I think your connections that you're drawing with the Telex folks is really it's really worth thinking about a little bit because definitely do hear the influence.
Sure. I'm going to talk about another couple of things about the instruments and the gear that they used on this album, because that may sort of go in this, a similar vein. Um, so I looked it up. Ron is still using the Roland Jupiter 8 as his instrument of choice. That's his synth. He used it on the last couple of albums. Although the sounds that come out of it are a little samey to me on this album. It's almost like, he's made a couple of patches and he's just going to use these three or four for the whole thing. And maybe that's more apparent when you listen because you're not as distracted by things like a guitar, uh, or a bass or anything like that. So most of it was done on that instrument, that synth. There were some instances throughout there of him using another synth, the synclavier, which is generally where you hear these tones that are sort of more crystalline, cling, sort of in nature. And if we, get into the songs, maybe we'll find instances to talk about them more. But what I really think um, gives this album its sonic character is the Linn Drum. That's the synthetic drum. That's the drum machine that they're using all throughout this album. This is the first time that I'm aware of that Sparks had used a drum machine and used a drum machine prominently throughout their whole album to make their rhythm section. And I think that does come through. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's a twosome. It's a duo of an album, augmented. I've often thought about how to explain this. That sometimes even when it's just the two of them, you still get a full band sound.
Right.
And I'm talking about throughout the whole career. And sometimes you get the two of them creating an album augmented by additional instrumentation to create a sound that they feel is necessary to advance their vision. And I think on this one, they felt they could get what they wanted without having the live drummer and without having all the instrumentation that they did before. And they brought him in where they thought it helped produce the sound. On something like Praying for a Party, which we'll talk about,
Yeah.
maybe it's a little different. Maybe they wanted that kind of heavy guitar sound. Maybe one or two other places they did. But again, referring to the interview that I did 10 years ago, believe it or not, with Dave Hendrick.
Yeah.
I asked him about some of these songs. He said, no, he really had a very minimal role in playing them.
Right.
So, and I've watched him performing them live on videos, and you can see he plays them. I think this gets to what you were talking about before. I'm sorry I'm digressing, but I think they wanted to be able to play these with their live band, but unlike the first two albums, they wanted this to sound distinct from the way the band sounded. Whereas with
Sure.
those other two albums, we talked about this, a big band sound. On this one, I think it was a Ron and Russell sound with the band augmenting, but still being able to capture enough of it to perform live. And apparently, what he said was that these were some of their best live performances by this point.
Yeah.
So that's a roundabout way to answer your question. I think, in terms, I guess the simpler answer is in terms of what they wanted to do, it's fine. In terms of whether it really captures a great band sound, I guess they didn't want to do that, but I think it's lacking.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I think we're probably not going to disagree on a whole lot here. I want to push ahead a little bit.
Sure.
Because I don't know where else to put this. There were some interesting things happening in Sparks' world that were not directly related to the recording of the album. As it turns out, I mentioned a few episodes back that that Ron was in contention for picking up a role in Airplane 2, a role that went to Sonny Bono. Well, it turns out Russ was approached by a Hollywood producer around this time to act in the lead role of a movie about a fake band, and that movie was called Get Crazy.
Really?
Who,
I didn't know.
yep,
Yeah.
who of course, as Sparks fans, we know the existence of that movie. Um, he was to play. Let's see, it was to be a rock and roll parody, and confess I have not seen the movie, and I need to, I guess, watch it. I don't know. This was to be a rock and roll parody by Embassy Studios based on the English superstar Reggie Wanker, which name probably has more impact in good old England than in the New World. Russell said originally Malcolm McDowell was the lead character. Troubles over his contract dragged on until they were forced to start shooting without him and to seek a replacement. I was given that role. After several weeks of shooting, however, the studio came to an agreement with McDowell and replaced me with the person they originally had sought for the role. After seeing the film, I was quite happy that they gave the part to Malcolm McDowell. It was no Clockwork Orange. All right.
You're saying there's film exists somewhere of Russell?
Somewhere. Yes. Russell had acted in many, many scenes for this movie that does exist out there, but we have not seen all those scenes.
Well, I have to confess, I've never seen the movie either.
I've never seen either.
I know there's a couple good Spark songs in it, but I feel like hearing the songs is probably enough. I've never heard anybody speak that highly of the movie, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I haven't either. But it's interesting to me because although I haven't seen the movie, I've seen a couple of clips from it. And, of course, I've heard the song that Sparks did for it. It does kind of seem of a piece of what was kind of happening in early 80s Hollywood culture at sort of the B level. I can see where that might tie into some of the stuff that Sparks were engaging with at that time. And I don't know. It's just it's one of those instances where I see like Sparks like going from like high art to low art and like maybe not always knowing what's what.
well, I'll tell you what. Rather than like us sitting here and lambasting the movie without having seen it, let's agree we're going to see it before we record the next part.
I think we should watch it while we record.
Oh my gosh, that would be your listenership would dwindle to zero. I think
maybe, I don't know, man. People are weird about those things.
people like those things, but let's watch it and then we can have a more intelligent discussion because I have nothing good to say about it, but I've never seen it.
I haven't seen it either.
And say, oh my God, that was the greatest movie I ever saw.
Yeah, that probably won't happen.
I don't think so.
All right. I'm going to take just a quick moment to talk about the album sleeve, the physical object, and then we'll get into the music. So and you have it right there.
Yeah, but
Boom. There it is.
there it is.
Beautiful Russ with his wonderful curls. And there is Ron splattered in a cream pie of some sort. So
Yes.
once again, this sleeve was designed by Larry Vogon, who designed the sleeves for Womp and Angst. Womp with the boxing thing, and then Angst, with the bride-groom thing.
It says cover concept, Ron Mail.
Yeah.
Art direction and design, Larry Vigan.
Right. That is also what I came across. So,
I'm sorry. I apologize.
no. That's,
You're just
Ron
getting
credit for that. So again, Larry Vogon, this guy who's been, shooting their album covers for the last couple of albums, he's keeping up with the sort of theme that they're doing, where they're presenting them, not only as the two guys who are the band, but in, different ways. There's a dichotomy. This guy's like this guy's like this. And very often Ron is sort of the fall guy. And in this case, he's getting cream pies on his face, which is funny. It's cute.
It is. It is. I mean, they carried that theme all the way to Drip, Drip, Drip.
Yeah.
So I don't think, but there's more albums. They've kind of gotten away from that. Drip, Drip, Drip it's funny because it kind of revisits it, but the last few albums have been more like, here's Ron and Russell, you know. But back then, yeah, that's the way they
Yeah,
did it.
that's what it was. Well, yeah, I think they're really trying to lean into that sort of Laurel and Hardy dynamic.
Those those
You know,
wacky Sparks
those
brothers.
wacky Sparks brothers, right? And I think well, for my money, I think that was a good angle. From
It
a
worked.
marketing perspective, uh, this is just a little thing here. So, according to Larry Vaughan, the I guess I wouldn't call him the photographer, but I guess he is the designer. 12 pies in all were used for the album cover shoot. Although Russ later told the Sparks fan club newsletter there are only 7. He said the pies had been frozen to keep their shape, but that made for a harder cream that Ron was forced to withstand. Some of the cream splattered onto Russ, and that was airbrushed out of the final photo. So you can just imagine you got Ron and Russ, and a few guys, and all these half frozen cream pies, and they're just spending a couple of hours just hucking, just throwing pies at Ron's face. Snap, 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 snap. And they took the best of what came from all of that and airbrushed out what didn't work, and that was your cover.
It's never been one of my favorites. It's just so absurd, but it's funny. It's funny. It's funny.
I love it.
It's
Yeah,
funny. Yeah.
I get you. And of course, you've got all the rest of the guys, the Bates Motel, Gleaming Spires guys on the back of the cover of the album.
Yes,
They
their
all
presence, even in the pictures, just gets
Yeah.
smaller and smaller as the album
Let's get
goes.
smaller. But that's what's all. But also, weird irony, kind of, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because they're all there on the same dimensions as Ron and Russ. You can barely hear those guys.
No, but they wanted to be presented as a band.
Yeah, they did. That's what
how
they
their core audience saw them.
Right. Yeah, gotcha. Album credits. I amassed I got all the album credits that I could find for this. So Ron, you got the synthesizers. Ronald is playing the Roland Jupiter 8. At this time, it was known as the Ronald Jupiter 8. This is at the time he had already relabeled his instrument, the Ronald, on stage. Sometimes he plays the synclavier, which is a slightly different synth. Russ on vocals, David Kay on drums. You got Bob Hogg, guitar when it's there, backing vocals, and percussion. We'll talk about the tab cans, I suppose, when
Just
we get to
noticed
it.
that. I never noticed that before. But just as you were reading, I was looking at it and I saw tab cans.
Tab cans, it's on there, isn't it?
It is.
Of course, you got Leslie Boehm on the bass, although that's barely audible. James Goodwin. So this is interesting, and we had this guy on the show, James Goodwin, if you recall, several months back. He played with Sparks in concert around 83, 84, 85, something around there. And he was featured visually on the back of the album there, although he does not play on this album at all.
He doesn't.
Not at all. He only played with them on tour. Yeah, but somehow he's there. So,
Right
Ron
here,
and Russ must have taken a shine to him.
It does say additional concert keyboards.
Oh, it does say that.
So
Well,
he
that's
was
what I
part of
get
the
for not
gang.
having the real deal.
It's just an odd little quirky thing.
It's true. Dan Laxman, engineer. All the tracks except for Cool Places and Lucky Me, Lucky You. You got Brian Reeves. He's an LA guy who is the engineer for Cool Places and Lucky Me, Lucky You. And I think we talked about a lot of this other stuff. Let's just go ahead and get into the songs. I could go over this other stuff forever. I talked about the Linn Drum a little bit. So I guess we'll get into the first song. Cool Places, which starts the album out. Strong beginning, strong single. And I want to ask you where you were when you first heard it.
Oh gosh, I can answer that for so many others, but I can't I can't
It doesn't have to
recall
be
where.
first.
What's that?
It doesn't have to be the first time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, city-wise, I was already in Pittsburgh, I think, at the time this came out. But yeah, I was in Pittsburgh, but I can't remember the exact location. What I can tell you is by then the record stores would hold the Sparks albums for me. And they
Oh,
would
that's
sometimes
nice.
even, yeah, they would let me, there were a couple that even let me know when they came in. So I guess it was just in my mom and dad's living room listening to Ron and
Nice.
Jane go at it.
Yeah. I mean, you were already a Sparks fan by there. Um, so this was this, but you probably were also accustomed to Sparks taking on different sounds every few years or
Oh
so.
yeah.
To
Yeah.
me, like if I heard Cool Places and had spent the last couple of years getting used to what I heard from Womb and Anks, it would be not a shock, but it would be a little different.
Yeah, but that gets again to why they really wanted to present themselves as a band,
Hmm.
so they didn't freak out their audience too much.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But no, I heard it, but that's the kind of upbeat, and that one you don't notice so much right away that it's at that age when you're just listening to it, you don't notice that it's just really electronic the first couple times you hear it. It sounds like a good lively Sparks song. That, or at least to me, that's
Yeah.
what I heard. I was 23, and that's what I heard. I heard a good lively Sparks song, and then it was later as you listen to the whole album,
Yeah.
you could for me it was later that the real distinctions between that and the other two started to really sink in. I mean,
Gotcha.
Cool Places could have fit in on to some in some ways in terms of the high energy, that it had.
Yeah.
It could have fit in with the prior two, and it just seemed okay. It's a little different. Then then you hear Popularity, and then you hear some of the other ones, Dance, goddamn it, and you hear it's really is a complete different beast. But for that one, that wasn't my initial impression, just from that one song.
So, I mean, the album, well, sorry, the video of that song really screams 1983 in so many ways to me. You got the green screen, you got the kind of low res video, you've got all these sort of images, they're sort of pastiched, from the 50s and 60s and stuff. And it looked very different from the stuff that they had shown us before in videos, from
Yeah.
my perspective.
Yeah, no, it was fun. It was just designed. I mean, Jane Wiedlin and Russell were dancing, and Ron was making his looks, and
Yeah.
I don't know. It would never. It's a fun video. But it seemed to not have a whole lot of identity to me.
Yeah, yeah.
Like
Is
some of
this a
the other
song you go
ones, like
back to like very often? Like when you compile, your whatever, best of, Sparks to queue up to listen to, is this often in there for
it
you?
would be. It would be.
Okay.
I mean, to me, when I'm with you is not necessarily one that would be there, right? And
Because for me that is.
right, for the
But
vast majority of people, that would be. I like it, but for me, I would rather hear this one. I always enjoyed it. I thought the words were funny. Then we'll
yeah.
sleep till 9 p.m. and start 5 p.m. and start it up all over again.
Right.
Yeah, it has its share of funny words. Again, seemed like just a fun Spark song with Jane Wiedlin, and that was cool.
Sure.
You
Sure.
know, I don't have
Yeah.
too many impressions about the video, to tell you the truth. I mean, if you ask me about the video for Funny Face, I have a lot of things to say,
Okay.
or I
Yes. I think
predict.
we talked about Funny
Yeah,
Face.
or I predict, but on this one, it
Yeah.
seemed, it was very MTV.
It was very MTV. And I
Yeah.
think it was a very, very conscious um decision to get them play on it on MTV for this.
No question about it.
And no doubt that the fact that, allegedly that it was Jane Wiedlin who reached out to Sparks first, no doubt Sparks would have just latched right onto that because, in early 1983, the Go-Go's were massive.
Oh, yeah. And he appeared on one of their albums too.
Yeah, I think
He
it was the
returned the
one
favor
after this.
Yeah, Stop and Go or something like that.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So they were hanging out together.
So this song lyrically is kind of a pace with a lot of the style of lyrics that we see in the album, where it just kind of seems like to be a simple-minded person, perhaps in LA, who is just, all about uh, being seen at the right places and, finding the right parties.
You know, we've talked about this too before, that not everything they do has to be, the second telling of the Bible, or
Yeah.
some new interpretation of Shakespeare or something. Sometimes I think in this period they just were having fun and they wanted to write some fun songs.
Yeah.
Now, that said, yes, you can interpret them, and we had a conversation offline about the song "Instant Weight Loss," where I think we came up with 4 or 5 different interpretations, which at the time before that I never thought of 4 or 5 different interpretations for that song. So
Yeah.
people hear, there's more to these songs. I don't want to give the wrong impression, but I think, and when we talk about the next song, I think we'll see that. But I think they weren't afraid to just write a song like "Praying for a Party" or this
Yeah.
one, which maybe is just about what it says it's about.
Right. One thing that I came across over and over again when researching this album is how much Ron and Russell, particularly Ron, asserted uh, almost defensively sometimes, depending on the interview, on how earnest these songs really were. And I've got some quotes to back that up. He did not, or they did not want many of these songs to be seen as ironic. Like, I think he was getting the point across, at least in many of these interviews, that he wanted to take the um, perspective of a person who really felt these feelings and thought these thoughts, and he's just, letting those play out.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, v-
Certainly with the next one.
oh yeah,
For the next one. And that one
definitely.
might be the one that there's some discussion about, that maybe they're getting at something a little bit more. But, Rockin' Girls, I Wish I Looked a Little Better, A Fun
Right.
Bunch of Guys from Outer Space. Those are good songs. And they,
Yeah,
I think they deserve to be just listened to on their own and appreciated for what they are.
sure.
There's a lot on this album, and I'm looking forward to talking about side B as well. But All You Ever Think About Is Sex. That's a nice composition. It's very compositionally sound.
That song is fantastic, and I can't wait till we talk about that one.
Yeah,
Um,
but you want to stick with Cool Places, and
yeah,
yeah, I mean, I've always liked it. My mom always liked it, for what that's worth. I think she's kind of I think I've mentioned her once or twice. She listened to a lot of Sparks when I did, and I was living there. And this was one that she liked. I remember she liked
yeah,
Cool Places. So
yeah,
it could appeal to people. You hear it
yeah,
right
yeah.
away, and you want to bounce around a little bit.
Right. I mean, you could approach it from several different ways. I mean, there's an effervescent, just kind of like, fun bounciness to it, and is Ron, really all about going to cool places, in Los Angeles? I don't know, but what's wrong with trying to assume the perspective of somebody who, that's something that matters, to that person. And,
Yeah.
and there it is. Yeah.
I mean, we don't really know, but I don't imagine he was that kind of person. But I think
Yeah.
he was writing a song for Russ and Jane Wiedlin to sing together, and he wanted it to be upbeat. And
So,
maybe there's a little irony there.
yeah.
They're kind of doofuses, but
Well, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure. Well,
yeah.
I'm
No,
not
not
sure.
them. I mean, the two
So,
characters in the song.
well, I know. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm
the
not,
two.
I'm not sure if Ron
Yeah.
wrote this, with the intention of having, with the intent of having, Russ and, Jane Wiedlin, uh, recording this together. I think he
Really?
may have had. I honestly don't know. Like, I don't know if he had already written this, or if they had gotten together and decided they wanted to do something, and then he wrote something for them.
Yeah. Huh.
But
Well, either way,
But
that's
either way,
what I meant, that they wanted to do something together, and he wrote a song that in his mind would be a good one for them to sing together, and that would be funny. And as we've talked about, at this point in their career, they were emphasizing the funny.
Right. Yeah, I think so too. And when you watch that video, it's so fun. Like it kind of doesn't really matter. Is this ironic? Is it not ironic? I don't know. It's fun. I like it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of enough for me.
Yeah.
Since we're doing it, I'll go ahead and read the lyrics to Cool Places. By the way, anyone who cares,
Oh wait, should I read the Jane parts?
I would love if you would read the Jane parts, if I can remember how they're separated.
Yeah, now I'm not sure either.
I know, right?
Maybe you.
I mean, it's kind of like
it's
kind of like one line is Russ and one line is Jane.
I think it starts with Jane.
Let's try that.
All right. You want me to be the Jane part?
Yes. This is in the key of G, everybody, by the way. And another point I wanted to make was that a lot of songs on this album, particularly on the first side, they really hang out in one key and one chord for a long, long, long time. And this is G.
Well, Keith Richards could play it. That's his favorite key.
There you go.
That would be a great cover.
It would be.
That would be a cover I'd pay to see. I want to go to cool places with you.
I want to take you cool places tonight.
I want to go where nobody's a fool.
And no one. Ooh.
Okay. So it starts off with Russell.
Feel him.
Yeah. So let's start over. You go ahead first.
It starts out with Russell. Yeah. I want to go to cool places with you.
I want to take you cool places tonight.
I want to go where nobody's a fool.
And no one says, hey, girl, need a light.
I want to move like this and that.
A minimum of chit chat.
I never want to cool
down. Cool down. Cool places tonight.
Oh, man, we got to take this on the road. It's a fun riff to get into. Yeah. I got to tell you, you're looking real good.
They let us in, so I'm feeling all right.
I like to go where sometimes they refuse.
Yeah, I remember last Saturday night.
But I'm feeling cooler now.
And they can tell we're cooler now.
It's obvious we're cooler
now.
Oh, yeah. Cooler now. Cooler
now. Cool places tonight.
And it goes on like that.
Yeah. But there's
cooler now. I want to go to cool places tonight. You get it. And then, yeah, there's a little bit more. After that, we'll slip out for a bite.
A coffee shop and toast, coffee, and juice.
And then we'll sleep till 5 p.m.
And start it up all over again.
I never want to cool down. Cool down. Cool. I want to go. I want to go. I want to go. I want to go.
I want to go.
minute, what's this? The episode's already over? But I only got to hear one measly lousy song. I know, it's a drag. But I figured an hour and 20 minutes and change is already kind of pushing the limits of most people's patience. But have no fear. We've got a lot more in the can from that podcasting session. And I will bring that to you, Sparks fans, just as soon as I can. Dance, goddammit.